instruction, but I'm happy to be here, not only because this is a setting which I prefer the most. I started my professional career technically in a private sector company, but that lasted only 3 weeks. Then I came on to the teaching faculty of a Delhi University college, and I think that 1 year was in many respects the most satisfying part of a nearly 50 years journey. Brajesh ji, thank you very much for being here. Professor Muni, why do I think that you were also a High Commissioner to Sri Lanka? No, I'm just saying it in light of it, because I think you devoted so much, apart from having served as ambassador in Vientiane. Along with many of us, we devoted many years to Jairam Ramesh mischievously referred to me in the corridor in the last session as the architect of modern Sri Lanka. He was being sarcastic, as is his wont, referring to the 1987 agreement. But my friends, the ambassadors of Brazil and Hungary, so many of my old friends that if I were to acknowledge each one of them individually, that would take up the time that Pradeep has allotted to me. But let me start by thanking Pradeep for trying to flatter me. At my age, flattery works. And because he tried to flatter me, let me say nice things in return. I think cuts is Pradeep. And I'm glad he referred to an interactive process with him going back to 1981. I think thereabouts. But more than that, I think you referred to him as working on the cutting edge of multilateralism and being a multinational NGO. I think he's a little more than that. I mean, having a physical presence in terms of people in Geneva, Washington, or elsewhere, that is one part of it. But I think also over last few decades, you know, I can think of very few people who individually have devoted so much time to multilateral economic diplomacy, and that's what stands out. So in my case, it's genuinely meant, Pradeep. So I think this volume which Anil and you and your younger colleague have put together has 29 contributions. Most of the contributors are people whom I have not only known, but I've had the privilege of working with them over extended years, starting from my own journey in the Foreign Office in 1974 to 2013. That's a 39 long years. And I think I've also worked with them. Your idea to get a Norwegian diplomat to certify the quality of Indian diplomacy is not a bad idea, except that when I saw the 3 people he had singled out for effusive praise, one happens to be my life partner and friend, and the other is young Mohan, whom I also regard as somebody who...
Lakshmi is a diplomat in her own...
Yeah, I know, but it's also it's a subjective thing for me, you know. So, no, she's not. I'm not saying that those 3 are not well deserved. I'm making a different point. And Mohan, whom I've seen grow from being 3rd secretary in the mission as a language trainee to becoming, I think, one of our leading commentators on multilateral economic diplomacy, and he replaced me in RIS as the chair. Vandana also, who's been singled out, is somebody I have worked with, and well-deserved praise. No, I'm making a different point. You know, India's multilateral diplomacy has traditionally, perhaps not so much now, but traditionally suffered from what I call a willful strong word perhaps, lack of resources. When I was a First Secretary on India's delegation to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, it was Ambassador B.L. Das and me. And Ambassador B.L. Das, by virtue of his sterling qualities, ended up being promoted first as chairman of the council and then chairman of the contracting party, which left me as a 26-year-old First Secretary speaking on behalf of India and, doing other things. That changed, but only slowly. I think the value of a compilation like this, of a compendium like this, when seen together with its 2011 previous edition, provides very useful space on anyone's library shelf, anyone who wants to educate himself or herself on what the fundamentals are in terms of issues, objectives, and the processes which are employed to get there. Each of these contributions, I think, are outstanding. I'm not going to pick on any one of them. I could, the people sitting around us, I could spend quite some time on each of their contributions. I want instead, looking at the time availability, to speak on something around economic diplomacy. And I want to speak on trade policy and economic diplomacy. When the world was nearing the end of the Second World War processes, even before the Second World War was over, the leading powers of the day met at a sleepy Hampshire village in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods. And they decided to work out the coordinates and architecture of a post-war order. There was founded the International Monetary Fund. There was founded the World Bank. And when it came to trade policy, there was no agreement because the leading power in the world at that point of time, the United States, had a fundamental dilemma to resolve in its own mind. Would the United States be willing to entrust economic trade policy decision-making to a multilateral agency other than the US Congress? That was the dilemma they had to face. And they decided that no, they felt more comfortable doing it themselves. Hence, the Havana Charter for International Trade Organizations was in a sense stillborn. And they adopted Chapter 4 of that, which dealt with tariffs and trade. And hence, through a legal instrument called the International Committee on International Trade Organization, ICITO, which gave a legal cover, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was born. Now, that was the situation in the 40s, 50s, late 40s when it was born. India was an original signatory to the GATT and to the Havana Charter because we were then under colonial domination, but we were represented by ourselves. Then we came to the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations, and I had the privilege of heading a UN sponsored technical assistance program for developing countries in the Asia-Pacific region, which was funded by the UNDP but anchored in UNCTAD. And I think we started working on many of these issues, although Pradeep and I had been in contact even during the early 80s. Where does India fit in? I think one of you said that, Pradeep, you said that we were a rich country long ago. Well, let's look at the specifics. There's a Cambridge historian called, economic historian called Angus Maddison. He wrote that in the year 1700s or thereabouts, the then Indian economy contributed something like 25% of the global GDP. And then we came to 190 years of colonial domination. And if you count from 1757 to 1947, our GDP declined from 24% of 25% of contributing to the global GDP. It came down to about 3% or so. It's only after that that we plateaued, went down further, and I think it's in the last few years, and I'm not making a political point, where the size of the economy grew, our interactive processes with the outside world grew, and today we are a $4 trillion economy in the direction of going towards 5 soon, then $10 trillion economy. He referred to Martin Wolf, who came here. I'll comment on that in a minute. I just took these notes down. But you referred to 2 non-IFS officers who have dealt with foreign economic policy or economic policy, and they were not part of the MEA. But let me tell you, I think Arvind Mayaram tried to run it from the finance ministry, and Sanjay Baru, who's my friend, from the PMO. So they're all part of a larger, group of people, some people from academia, some other outside. So I think that makes for a small, significant, but growing tribe of thinkers who are focusing on economic policy. Now, I want to be careful. Insofar as economic policy is concerned, there's no dearth of people around. Insofar as trade promotion is concerned, there's no dearth of people around. I'm not even sure if that's not the job primarily of export promotion councils. When I was going on my first posting to Geneva in September 1981, I met the then one of the export promotion councils. We had a dispute case coming up in the GATT, because that was the level of our manufacturing. Industrial fasteners and sanitary castings. Sanitary castings are the most basic things, manhole covers that you put there. And the US has decided to impose countervailing action against this thing, because we had not given them the benefit of the injury test as part of the Tokyo Round agreement on subsidies and countervailing duties. But let me come back to trade policy in India. I think there have been periods that trade policy has occupied a lot of attention, and then suddenly when you start to grow, you come to the conclusion, and this is where I think mistakes of perception also. When I hear the term Atmanirbharta, my friends, some of them whom I've tried to engage in a discussion, I tell them it does not mean turning your back to the outside world. No, why should we import if we can make it? I said, by all means do. But today, in a $4 trillion economy, a starting point for any analysis should be that 50% of that GDP comes from the external sector, which means the value of goods imported and exported and the remittances. If that is true, then it stands to reason that if you do turn your back to the outside world, your GDP is not going to grow. I mean, your GDP may grow because the domestic market is large and there's a lot of economic fury which has been unleashed, especially after the pandemic. But it means that you have to be part of global processes. That's the point I make. Which means that you have necessarily to engage in the formalization of arrangements, which are both intergovernmental, which are both, because they are intergovernmental, they also involve value supply chains. So if there is an international arrangement coming into being, you can't say, India, don't need it. This has been an old debate in multilateral diplomacy and in trade policy. The first people who wanted to go it alone were not who you think they might be. They were those who were the dominant economic players, and they decided they wanted to go it alone because they were very powerful. But then, as the history of economic diplomacy showed they were powerful one day, they ceased to be powerful the other day. Powerful in economic terms. So if you turn to the preamble of the general agreement, the first GATT, or the preamble of the World Trade Organization, it has a set of objectives that you engage in mutually beneficial arrangements with a view to increasing the standard of living of your own people. So increasing the standard of living of your own people, if you think philosophically, that can be devoid from or different from trading, I'm not so sure. I must say, I always thought I was one of the few people in the government who had this kind of thinking, but I was very happy to find Piyush ji the other day. He was speaking at a CII event post-budget, and he made the same points. He turned to our industry and said, listen, I can understand your desire to get protection. Yes, fair enough. But you also have a desire to export to the outside market. So you cannot have a situation that you get one and you think you'll get the other. Therefore, I think some of the delay in the conclusion of our FTAs, etc., those are things I think will be looked at in the third term. I'm very happy, at least on the UK FTO, things have started, and I'm sure this will pick up when we, as we, get down to solid governance. You see, because whenever you elected for a third term, which, by the way, is in and of itself unprecedented. I was looking at global leaders in the context of a global summit, and I said, which one of them, which countries can have the same government coming back a second time? And my conclusion was not many. Not because they're not good or bad. I had the privilege of serving in Brazil as India's ambassador when President Lula's first term was there, and I've had the privilege of seeing Brazil's transformation. I have been to Hungary many times because Lakshmi used to be ambassador to Hungary. But to pull off a third term based on performance is very creditable. But you can do more things. You can also come to the conclusion that some of the stuff which was work in progress can now be definitely implemented. Pradeep, you referred to cooperative federalism as one of the things. I have a very simple answer. You'll get very good results on cooperative federalism. Just elect BJP governments in all the states. No, I'm saying it on a serious note. You think I'm saying that? No, coming back seriously. Look, I have been petroleum and natural gas minister for 3 years. And I can say this not because he's my boss. I can't think of any other leader who, faced with the kind of problems we had, was able to navigate the global turbulence, both in terms of availability, affordability, and sustainability. Why was he able to do it? He was very clear. At a time when, during the pandemic, prices of crude oil fell to $19.56 a barrel. Then when economic activity revived, it shot up to $128. Now, we could have been echoing everybody's mantra, this is a deregulated sector, let the market bear. Amitabh, what would have happened if we had allowed the market to bear? Place would have been up in flames. See what happened in Sri Lanka. They were not able to navigate it. What happens on our western neighbor? They were not able to, but most of the world couldn't navigate. But the Prime Minister was clear. He said, I remember clearly, in November 2021, May 2022, he said, I don't care what the revenue situation is, cut the excise on petrol and diesel by 16 rupees and 13 rupees, which I don't remember. And all the BJP states followed suit, they cut their VAT on that. As a result of which, petrol prices, diesel prices, the only country in the world that will actually come down in a 3-year reference period. But I'm politically, since JNU is my favorite center for intellectual discourse. Since the time I was in the university, not now. Now you guys are very relatively sober, but when we were young in the university, I had a theory, I don't know whether I should share with it, but I'm known for blunt speaking. किसी ने पूछा यूनिवर्सिटी में इंदिरा जी ने एक JNU क्यों बुलाया? तो उन्होंने बोला ये कम्युनिस्ट जो है ना बड़ा तंग करने वाले हैं, इन सबको कम्युनिस्ट एकेडमिक्स को यूनिवर्सिटी में बंद कर दो, वहां पे इंटेलेक्चुअल काम करेंगे. So Nurul Hasan Saab was appointed vice chancellor, पर हमें बड़ा दुख हुआ, some of our best teachers came away here यार. मेरा हिस्ट्री डिपार्टमेंट हिंदू कॉलेज का जिसको वो कहते थे, they all came here. तो I said, ये अच्छा यार, ये JNU बनाई, हमारी पुरानी यूनिवर्सिटी है. You know, all our stalwarts ended up coming here, and they enriched academic life here, and academic life here being enriched is academic life all over the country being enriched. But I'm coming to a different point. You are able to deal with cooperative federalism provided you realize what the fundamentals are. You can't say, अरे आपने petrol price, diesel price ये कर दिया, next day you get a chance to form a government in Karnataka, then you raise it suddenly. अरे भाई ये क्या हो गया? वो भी पेट्रोल प्राइस भी रेज कर दिया, दूध का प्राइस भी रेज कर दिया, ट्रांसपोर्ट जो मुफ्त की थी वो भी भाड़ा बना दिया. So I think some of that stuff gets caught because today, I mean, somebody said social media kya, it's storm in a teacup. I said, no. Social media has its, no matter how much I get trolled. उसका ये अगर 2011 में किसी ने स्टेटमेंट की थी and it's available the clip somewhere, then somebody played back to you. हाँ भाई, show you the mirror. So that is it. Look, you said something about India being aspirational 24. I agree with you, but that's a little more than that. When we started talking about a $5 trillion economy, let me tell you, every economist worth his salt that I know, and I don't know many, they told me you guys are talking nonsense. क्यों? अरे नहीं ये नहीं होगा, वो नहीं होगा. वो जहीं आपके जो इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर रह चुके थे, वो वहाँ गए वापस शिकागो या कहाँ जहाँ से आए थे. नहीं शिकागो भी गए, कुछ वॉशिंगटन भी गए. अरे मैं नहीं किसी का नाम नहीं लेता हूँ, मैं तो एकेडमिक डिस्कशन है, मैं नाम क्यों लूँ. अरे वो क्या जाओगे बोला इंडिया डजंट हैव दिस राइट, इंडिया. अरे बस काम तुम वहां पे कर रहे हो, इंडिया डजंट हैव इट राइट. कम एंड सी, could anyone have imagined some of the stuff that we've done? And I'm not going to go into that. So I'm coming back to a simple thing. What Martin Wolf, by the way, is somebody I like. I used to regularly have engagement in terms of working luncheons with him. He's a great friend of Montague's and others. I used to, when I was posted in London. देखिए वो क्या कह रहे हैं 2047 विकसित भारत का. विकसित भारत मीन्स डेवलप्ड नेशन. आप मेरे को बताइए दुनिया में कहीं डेवलप्ड नेशन की डेफिनेशन है? मुझे जहां तक जानकारी है, आई एम सॉरी, आई एम टेंडेंसी टू ब्रेक इनटू, I said, as far as I know, there's no definition of what is a developed country. I have some knowledge of what constitutes a least developed country because there is a categorization in the UN. And I know something about developing countries because they all certify themselves as developing countries. You know, because you're a developing country, say, I want concessional finance, I want this, I want that. And I asked around who's here, with due respect, when China, which is a $19 trillion economy, calls itself a developing country, I said, that's how developing I want to be. Now I'm very clear. I mean, let's be clear, other than the United States, which is, has no pretensions of calling itself a developing country, and I must say, in fairness to the Europeans, who have never said that they were developing, they were all $4 trillion, $5 trillion economies. I'm talking about my friends in France, UK, and others. And that's why when we talk about Angus Madison, I think the thrill most Indians got when India replaced the United Kingdom as the 5th largest economy was a special degree of satisfaction. When you go past France, Germany, Japan, it won't have the same thrill will not be there. But let me tell you two things. Whether you buy the projections which even the fund is making or others are making on the likely rate of growth, we will grow at 7% plus minimum. If on a $4 trillion economy, you grow at 7% for the next 2-3 years, and you project that upwards, it doesn't matter what the size of your economy in 2040 is, because there can be always black swan moments, there can be other issues, but you're going in a particular direction. Now to draw instinct, by the way, I think Lakshmi is writing an article on this. I don't know. I found out only from my, the guy who does my sometimes number crunching. I was getting a little iffy with him. I said, what happened? I was wanting to draft paper. He said, no, I'm working on something for ma'am. So I never asked what she's working on. But I think it's something, some of us should do it. Arey bhai, it doesn't matter whether the size of your economy, as Ernst & Young says in 2040 is 40 trillion or what. That's not the issue. It doesn't matter. No, there won't be a developed country. It will be a high income, kya bola? Medium high income, pata nahi, aisa country. I don't know what a definition of a developed country is. Nobody has a definition of a developed country. So to do this kind of nitpicking, I think anybody who was born and brought up with the historical legacy of the United Kingdom, they're going to have some problems like this for a while. And I'm saying this in a lighter moment because I know I'm being recorded. But I'll tell you, India is being transformed. When you do a discussion like this, I think a good message that should go out from there is that economic diplomacy must get bigger. I must say I was in a cabinet one day when I saw a proposal for cadre strengthening in the MEA, and Jaishankar ji wasn't there that day. Normally I speak up easily. I must say I was taken aback. I would have thought that they should get more people. Because now I come back to a point I wanted to make in the beginning, but I make it in the conclusion. When we were on the Security Council, I'm talking about 2011 and 12, somebody who was on the Security Council Secretariat was a very dear friend of mine, and my friendships normally develop because I find people intellectually engaging. And he told me a very interesting thing. He said the UN Secretariat did an analysis of where the most effective diplomats come from. He said, and we were surprised about the two top figures which came out. I said, why? He said, there's a reason. He said, when you talk about Brazil, Itamaraty, everybody knows Brazilian diplomats are top class because they speak many languages. An average Brazilian diplomat will speak English, Portuguese, Spanish also, and they have this in-service training, Itamaraty. So as they're, but they're large delegations. Hungary, some of my best friends, Zaba, all these people, they're all best, but they don't have very small delegations. He said, we found that the highest quality among countries which have the smallest delegation, and that the delegation was the answer. One is Singapore, surprisingly. Because an average Singaporean diplomat, there'll be very few there, but when they speak to the point. And the other was India. I said, but India is a large country. He said, what your delegation size? You know, Amitabh, when I had the privilege of leading our campaign into the election of the Security Council and serving on the council for 2 years, I got only 2 additional posts. I did not have even one person per committee that we were listening. I'm not saying it as a complaint, but India, we believe in doing that, and if the quality were not right, then you would flop. So therefore, sometimes you make a mistake. You have very few people if you don't put the best people. And we've had this dilemma in our own system. Sometimes we think multilateralism is not as important as solid bilateral engagement, so send people whom you can only spare there and some of the better guys you can't spare there. I think it's a mistake. Because that multilateral arena where you have to increasingly engage a large number of delegation on issues. Now, as you grow in terms of economic size, the number of issues you will have to deal with are much higher. So I have one or two unpleasant comments to make based on my own experience. I think those of us who have worked in Geneva will come to the conclusion that whether you like it or not, you cannot go on saying an issue is outside the legal remit. When they were trying to bring in services into the remit of the general agreement, we decided in 1980s, and it was not, thankfully, the BJP government, so otherwise, BJP is inward looking. It was a solid Congress government led by Mrs. Gandhi, who we got instructions saying, if anybody wants to bring services into the GATT, you should say, over my dead body. So everybody started from Vijay Kelkar to Shivraj Patel, who was the Minister of State for Commerce, who came, B.L. Das, Hardeep Puri. And since Mr. Das was very senior, I became the person who said no services outside the legal. अरे भाई उसके बाद क्या हुआ? Services तो आ गई. Through an innocuous this thing, countries with an interest in services can exchange, this thing amongst yourselves. Well, what happened to the Indian economy, yaar? If you do a profiling of the Indian GDP, how much of your GDP is services? Now you can say, all right, I've grown, but I don't want it service. But some of your exports are also services. So what I'm saying is that in trade policy, we have a tendency sometimes to take positions which are not entirely thought through. So you go on saying no, 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 no. It may be a better idea to do a perspective plan 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So that's why when I draw, normally I wouldn't have, when I heard Piyush ji making that statement, so I said, well, some of the thoughts which have been, in my mind should come up. That's one. Secondly, let's be absolutely clear that after this phase of turbulence and elections in different countries is over, I mean elections in the United States, I mean global turbulence as being witnessed in the Gulf, you know, I'm talking about Iran, Israel, the world will sit down to redrawing the economic landscape. I think there's enough. I'm not making a prediction saying that it's going to happen tomorrow or day after. But people are going to need to come back to the same objectives, which is we want to raise the standard of living of our people, which is what we want to do in India. But more than that, I think what they will do is that the nature of engagement will have to be rethought through. Does that mean in reform in the multilateral system? Certainly, as somebody who's worked on the Security Council, we have as part of the G4, but I think some people will need to go back to the drawing board. Why am I saying this here? I think people who contribute to volumes like this should contribute to that process. So you want to do a book on foreign diplomats, etc. That's a good thing. That's a mechanical exercise. It would be an even better exercise if you can get some bright people together, have a day-long seminar somewhere in Rajasthan or somewhere else, and work on what would a new order look like. Not being ideological, but I mean, what are the exchange? For instance, I think Anil was saying, you were saying, Amitabh, the whole concept of trade and economic exchange has changed. We started with, what is the GATT predicated on? Goods crossing borders and border measures being imposed. When you came into services, you were already in production processes. But now you're into technology, you're into intellectual property also, whole thing is run, and you're going to go into that, what is that, fourth generation? Artificial intelligence. World trade is going to change. And I think some bright guys, including our contributors here, should sit down for a day and a half, and work out what the shape of international trade and multilateral diplomacy and trade policy should be when you have got all these other things which are just now slightly outside the room but are coming in. And by the way, if cuts, I'm sure you guys are well to do, but if not, I could get somebody to sponsor an event like this also. So thank you very much. I've taken a little longer than I had anticipated to, but thank you for giving me a patient hearing, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Hardeep. That was a brilliant and a stimulating speech. And of course, we'll take forward your suggestion very seriously. It is within our sort of agenda as such. As you have rightly pointed out, that 30 years ago you could recognize the fact that